So this week's episode actually answers some pretty big questions that we've had with this series. Now, we know that this basically antagonist, this girl, obviously knew Juri from in the past. She obviously was in the stasis with her when she first entered. But we didn't know exactly how or why that happened. What's really interesting with how she ultimately entered stasis with her family is it shows us that the specific rules that people probably think are needed to enter this world aren't actually needed in the specific way that they probably think. You don't have to slice your hand open after a sacrifice of blood. It seems like as long as there is some form of liquid on the stone when the words are said in a general area, that will trigger the people in going into stasis. Because I believe in the first episode when the stasis is revealed, I think the grandfather actually uses blood or something like that. Then we see that if someone's in the general area, even if they don't say the same words, as long as they have the stone, and then we see the kids spill water on the stone, that triggered it. So that's very interesting, and it leads me to believe that maybe a lot of the rules that have been maybe passed down, because we do know that this one side believes it in some sort of religion. I mean, they call the handlers the heralds and things like that. So it's quite interesting how the differences are kind of being portrayed, that we're seeing the different forms of how things are working, but then you could see one side worship it as more of a religion, and then the other side worshiping it more as a tool. But it seems like both sides may not know the full ins and outs on how this is working, which is pretty interesting. But what's even more interesting is we see that her family essentially all went into the handlers. They all became handlers in their own way. But it seems like when I was watching this, I was really questioning. I was like, well, what triggers it? Who decides who becomes a handler? Is there a even more divine beast? But it seems like anyone who's weak of mind, anyone who is panicking, who doesn't believe that they could escape or maybe survive, that seems to be what triggers these jellyfish inside them to essentially turn them into the law enforcement of this world. And we see that this girl's family all became it. I mean, we get to see the little brother as a miniature handler, and you can tell that completely crushes her, but it's quite interesting. So it seems like anyone who's panicking, anyone who maybe doesn't think that they can survive in this world will become one. And I believe it was a couple of weeks back, Juri's brother, I think at one point was freaking out and we started seeing the jellyfish come from him. If I'm not mistaken, that happened, but then I think he snapped back to it and then it didn't happen. So as long as everyone has a strong willpower, it seems like that will keep them from turning into the law enforcement of this world, which is quite interesting, because I was wondering if maybe Juri herself would turn into one because of her weird power, but it seems like as long as someone stays strong in mind, they're not freaking out, that will keep them as being a normal human. Obviously, I think we're still gonna see more twists and turns with this mechanic, but it definitely lays out a lot of the foundation with what makes these handlers what they are, and also just how heartbreaking it is for, even though they are the antagonist, this girl definitely is heartbroken with what happened. And I just enjoyed how this functioned overall, because it was very interesting to see even more mechanics for this world and the handlers and things like that, because they were kind of testing the boundaries. There probably is more than one handler in this world, so you just have to gradually increase your intent to kill the stalled so one would appear. And at first when you see that little handler, I actually kind of chuckled. I was like, yeah, I mean, they're incredibly strong, but I really don't feel like this little thing is going to be that much of a threat. And then when you learn that, oh, that's actually her little brother, it gets a little heartbreaking, and then you just see ultimately what happens and just the blood and carnage. I really enjoy how they animate the handlers, because it's so quick and just drastic. They'll just appear, giant handler, little handler, whatever, and then they'll just completely swipe their arm and cut off a head, and it'll just be so dramatic and so quick that it's actually terrifying how they present the handlers. And I think it's why they work so well, because the characters are freaked out, and as me, a viewer, I'm just I'm kind of freaked out too, because these things are designed creepy, they just feel creepy, they're insanely powerful, and it's just awesome to see them. But it's interesting how Juri has been kind of moving around this world, because the grandfather has this teleportation ability, and then she has this fist of fury that can extract the jellyfish from the people, and just the way they're moving around, it just reminds me of the X-Men. I believe his name was Nightcrawler, who has that teleportation ability. It's kind of funny, but kind of badass to watch her kind of jump around and do all these kind of crazy moves. But I'm really curious to see where the relationship is going to go between Juri and this other girl, because she wants obviously to know more about her, because she lost her family around the same time that this girl seemingly met her. It's going to be interesting to see what the direction is going to go. If she's going to be someone who's going to hate Juri, want to kill her, or if it's going to be something that she wants to be friends, maybe have an alliance or something like that. But it's kind of unexpected, because every episode has had a pretty big cliffhanger, but it never really felt like something bad was going to happen next week. I always felt like the characters are going to get out of this fine. But at the end, when one of these guys is trying to stab the brother, he kept deflecting the blade. And it made sense, because this is an old man trying to stab a guy, just the way way he was kind of like fumbling with his shirt to like basically stop his knife, it made sense. I was like, okay, and then he actually got stabbed. Now, I do think he's going to live, maybe he won't, but it's very interesting with how this cliffhanger functions in comparison to the others, because it actually does feel like a character might die here, like a main character, and I'm not sure how they would get out of that. But then again, maybe, I feel like there's ways that they could keep him alive, but at the same time, I feel like there is a good chance that he might be severely hurt, especially depending on where he got stabbed. We don't quite know, we just see a close-up of the blade going inside his body, and then obviously blood coming out. So it's going to be interesting, and maybe they're going to, like, I could actually see this. I wouldn't be surprised if Juri extracts the jellyfish from him, so he's basically goes back into being a stalled with just the wound, so then when they essentially leave the world, they could get him to a hospital. I could see something like that happening for sure, but it'll be interesting to see where they take this cliffhanger next week. But overall, like, this episode at times, I felt like it was a little slow, it was a little kind of dragging out some things, but as a whole, reflecting on it, I actually think this was a pretty solid episode. Not my favorite of the series, but it answered so many questions about the handlers and just this world overall, but also set up an amazing cliffhanger for next week that really gets us wanting to see where it's gonna go, that I really don't have a major complaint. Like, there was a couple of things, like, just with some of the side characters, like, talking to that one girl being like, so, can I bang you in order to help you out? It's like, it didn't really feel necessary to do that. I mean, they're scumbags, so I mean, it just shows that they're scumbags, but there's just a little few moments like that, but overall, like, as a whole, this package for this episode was really good. Like, I really enjoyed it. I just enjoy the fact that we're constantly learning more about this world, and we're not waiting till episodes 8 and 9 and 10 to reveal information that definitely feels fitting for the early episodes. But it's just interesting, like, where the end game will ultimately lead us. Like, ultimately, what's going to happen once Juri rescues all of her family? Where does it go from there? Are they going to leave the stalled world and go to a different one? Who is the endgame villain? Like, ultimately, where are we going with this? And I can't wait to see where that's going to lead us. But so far, I've been loving this show. Definitely one of my favorites of the season. But let me know your thoughts. What did you think of all the reveals? And where do you think that cliffhanger is going to take us next week? Let me know your thoughts. And before you leave, smack that like button, share your support. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.